Homeless at 19, he inherited an abandoned orchard, then found what changed his life. It's a story about how the things we think are worthless can sometimes hold the key to everything. If you've ever felt lost and then found a sign, you'll know what I'm talking about. Make sure to subscribe because we tell stories like this for people who know what a second chance really means. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were gray, not just in the sky that pressed down on the city, but in the shelter itself. Gray linoleum floors, gray metal bunks, gray stew for dinner. The color of waiting. I was 19, a legal adult for a year, which meant the system had politely and firmly shown me the door. My life was a collection of temporary addresses and the gnawing feeling of being untethered, a ghost haunting the edges of other people's lives. The envelope was stiff and cream-colored, a shock of formal importance in a place where everything was disposable. My name was typed on the front, Leo Vance. It looked alien, like the name of a character in a book, not the name of the guy in the worn-out hoodie trying to be invisible in the back corner of the common room. I took it to my bunk, a small metal slab that was the only space in the world I could even pretend to call my own. The paper inside was thick with an embossed letterhead. Davies and Croft, attorneys at law. My heart did a slow, heavy lurch. Lawyers meant trouble. They meant official forms and final notices, the kind of language that sealed fates. I read the first line, and the world tilted. Regarding the estate of the late Arthur Vance, my grandfather. A man who was more of a myth than a memory. A man who had walked out of my life when I was 6, leaving me in the care of a state that raised children with paperwork and protocol. For 13 years, he was a ghost, a question I'd learned to stop asking. Now, he was the late Arthur Vance. The words didn't hurt as much as they confused. How can you mourn a ghost? The letter requested my presence at their downtown office to discuss the terms of his will. It was formal, cold, and offered no details. For 2 days I carried it in my pocket, the sharp corners of the paper, a constant reminder against my leg. The world felt thin, like a movie screen I was watching from too close. My grandfather had left me something. The idea was absurd. He had left me nothing for 13 years. Not a letter, not a birthday card, not a single phone call. His parting gift had been abandonment. What could he possibly have to give me now? Resentment was a familiar coat, and I pulled it on tight. Still, I went, because what else was there to do? Hope is a stubborn weed, and even in the most barren soil, it finds a way to sprout. The law office was on the 34th floor of a glass tower that scraped the clouds. The elevator ride was silent and smooth, lifting me out of the grit of the streets and into a world of hushed carpets and polished wood. I felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a cathedral. Ms. Davies was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that didn't seem to miss anything. She didn't look at my worn jeans or scuffed boots with pity, but with a kind of neutral appraisal, like a scientist observing a specimen. She gestured for me to sit, and the leather chair sighed as I sank into it. It was the most comfortable thing I'd sat on in a year. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice calm and even. "Thank you for coming. I was your grandfather's attorney for the last few years of his life." She slid a thick file across the polished desk. My name was on the tab. "Arthur passed away 2 months ago. He had been ill for some time." I just nodded, a hollow feeling spreading in my chest. 2 months. He had been gone for 2 months, and I was just now finding out. Another kind of abandonment. He didn't have much, I'm afraid, she continued, her eyes softening just a little. He lived a very simple life, but he was adamant that what he did have should go to you. She paused, letting the words sink in. He left you his property, a small parcel of land upstate, near a town called Havenwood. It's about 5 acres, mostly an old apple orchard. An orchard. The word sounded poetic, ancient. I pictured neat rows of trees, red apples hanging like jewels, a little farmhouse with a curl of smoke coming from the chimney. It was a fantasy, a daydream. An orchard, I repeated, my voice raspy. He owned an orchard? Ms. Davies gave a small, tight smile. Owned is the correct legal term, yes. But I need to be very clear with you, Leo. The property is not in good condition. The house is dilapidated, likely uninhabitable. The trees haven't been productive for over a decade. It's been abandoned for some time. The daydream dissolved. Abandoned. That sounded more familiar. Then came the other shoe, the one I knew was waiting to drop. There is also a significant amount of debt tied to the property, she said, her tone becoming more clinical. Back taxes, liens from various creditors. Your grandfather took out several loans against the land over the years. She named a figure, a number so large it felt like a joke. It was more money than I could imagine, a weight that could crush a person. Essentially, she concluded, the property is underwater. The debt far exceeds its current market value as agricultural land. So, he'd left me a ruin and a mountain of debt. It wasn't a gift, it was a curse. The old resentment came roaring back, hot and bitter. This was his final act, a last cruel joke played from beyond the grave. So what am I supposed to do with it? I asked, the words coming out sharper than I intended. I don't have any money. I can't pay off that. I gestured vaguely at the file, at the impossible number. I know, she said patiently. And Arthur knew that too. Which brings us to the second part of this. She pulled another, much thinner folder from her drawer. There is an interested party, a company called Stature Development. They have been trying to acquire land in that area for a new resort project. They've made a formal offer to purchase the property. She slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was an offer letter. They were offering to buy the land, pay off all the associated debts in full, and leave the remainder to the beneficiary of the estate, to me. The number at the bottom of the page made my breath catch. After the debts were settled, the remaining sum would be $20,000. $20,000. To a kid who counted his net worth in loose change, it was a fortune. It was a security deposit on an apartment. It was new clothes. It was 3 meals a day for a long, long time. It was a ticket out of the gray. It was a life. They've been trying to get this land for years, Ms. Davies explained. Your grandfather always refused to sell. I advised him to, many times. It would have made his final years much easier. But he was stubborn. Stubborn. Or something else. The offer is conditional, she added, pulling me back from my daze. They need an answer within 30 days. And you, as the heir, are required by law to visit the property, to perform a basic inspection before the title can be transferred. It's a formality, but a necessary one. She handed me a large manila envelope. In here you'll find the deed, a map to the property, a cashier's check for $500 to cover your travel and expenses, and the keys your grandfather left. The rest of the money came from his final bank account. $500. It was more cash than I'd held in my hands at one time in my entire life. And keys. Keys to a place I'd never seen, left by a man I barely knew. "My advice, Leo," she said, her professional mask slipping for a moment to reveal a genuine flicker of concern, "is to take the trip. See the place for yourself, but then sign the papers. Take the money and start over. It's what your grandfather should have done. It's a clean break." A clean break. It sounded so simple, so tempting. $20,000 to wash away 13 years of neglect. To finally be free of him, of the questions, of the ghost. It was the smart thing to do, the only thing to do. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'll go." I stood up, the heavy envelope feeling like a lead weight in my hand. "Thank you, Ms. Davies." "Call me Sarah," she said, with another small smile. "And Leo, be careful. It's been empty a long time." The bus ride upstate was a slow crawl out of hell. The city peeled away in layers of concrete and steel, replaced by the endless green of the suburbs, which eventually bled into the deeper, wilder green of the countryside. I sat with my forehead pressed against the cool glass of the window, watching the world blur by. The $500 was in a tight roll in my front pocket, a secret warmth against my skin. It felt dangerous, like carrying a live thing. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't hungry. I had bought a sandwich and a coffee at the bus station, and the simple act of paying for food without worrying felt like an incredible luxury. The bus was nearly empty by the time it wheezed into Havenwood. The town was little more than a wide spot in the road, a single main street with a handful of storefronts that looked like they hadn't changed since the 1970s. A grocery store, a diner with a buzzing neon sign, a hardware store, a post office. Everything was quiet, settled, basking in the late afternoon sun. People moved slower here. No one was rushing. A few old men sitting on a bench outside the grocery store watched me as I stepped off the bus, their eyes lingering on my city clothes and my worn backpack. I was an outsider, an anomaly. It was a feeling I was used to. The map Ms. Davies, Sarah, had given me was hand-drawn on the back of a legal document, a faint sketch in Arthur Vance's spidery handwriting. Blackwood Orchard, it was called. It was a 3-mile walk from the town center, down a main road and then onto a smaller, unpaved lane. The air here was different. It smelled of damp earth, of pine needles, of cut grass. It was clean and sharp, a stark contrast to the city's perpetual exhaust fumes. The walk was long, and my backpack, which held everything I owned in the world, grew heavier with each step. The sun beat down, and sweat trickled down my back. I passed fields and farmhouses, but the closer I got to the location on the map, the more the properties seemed to thin out, the woods pressing in closer to the road. Finally, I saw it, a rusted wrought-iron gate, half swallowed by overgrown vines. One of the hinges was broken, so it hung at a drunken angle, permanently ajar. Beyond it, a dirt track disappeared into a tunnel of tangled trees. This was it, Blackwood Orchard. I pushed through the gate, the rusted metal groaning in protest. The air inside felt instantly cooler, damper. The light was dappled and green, filtered through a thick canopy of leaves. But this wasn't the idyllic orchard of my imagination. This was a wild, untamed place. The apple trees were there, but they were gnarled and ancient, their branches twisted into arthritic shapes, choked with vines and moss. The ground was a chaotic mess of weeds and fallen branches. It felt less like a farm and more like a forest that was slowly swallowing the last remnants of one. I followed the track, my boots sinking into the soft earth. After a few hundred yards, the trees opened into a small clearing, and I saw the house. My heart sank. Dilapidated was too kind a word. It was a skeleton. A two-story farmhouse that might have been charming once, but was now surrendering to the elements. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken back. Paint peeled from the clapboard siding in long, curling strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. Several windows were shattered, dark eyes staring out into the wild garden. A wide porch wrapped around the front, but part of its roof had collapsed, and the floorboards looked rotten and treacherous. It wasn't abandoned. It was dying. I stood there for a long time, just looking at it. This was my inheritance, a ruin, a monument to failure. The anger I'd felt in the lawyer's office came back, cold and sharp. This place was a perfect metaphor for my grandfather's legacy. A broken, empty thing with a crushing weight of debt attached. Sarah Davies was right. The only sane thing to do was sign the papers, take the money, and run. Never look back. Let stature development bulldoze this sad, forgotten place and turn it into something new. It deserved to be erased. The keys were heavy in my hand. There were 3 of them on a simple metal ring. One was a large, old-fashioned skeleton key, the kind you see in movies. I circled the house, looking for the front door. The porch steps groaned under my weight, and I walked carefully, testing each board before putting my full weight on it. The front door was swollen shut in its frame, the wood warped by years of rain and humidity. I tried the skeleton key, but it wouldn't even turn in the rusted lock. I wasn't surprised. I went around the back. There was a smaller, simpler door, probably leading to a kitchen or a mudroom. It looked just as weathered, but maybe less stubborn. The second key, a more modern one, slid into the lock. It was stiff, and I had to jiggle it, putting my shoulder into the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud crack of splitting wood and a groan of rusty metal, the lock turned. The door swung inward into darkness. The air that rushed out was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time. It smelled of dust, of mildew, of decaying paper and dried herbs. I hesitated on the threshold, a primal fear of disturbing a tomb holding me back. But this was what I had come for, the inspection, the formality. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was a kitchen. Sunlight struggled through a grimy window over a deep porcelain sink, illuminating a swirling universe of dust motes. The countertops were covered in a thick layer of gray dust. An old-fashioned wood-burning stove stood cold in a corner. A wooden table and 2 chairs sat in the middle of the room, one of the chairs overturned on its side. It looked like someone had left in a hurry. I moved slowly through the house, room by room. It was small. Downstairs was the kitchen, a living room, and a tiny bathroom. The living room was dominated by a stone fireplace, its mantel bare except for a thick blanket of dust. A single armchair, its floral pattern faded to a pale ghost of its former self, sat facing the hearth. The stuffing was coming out of one of the arms. Upstairs was just two small bedrooms, their floors littered with peeling wallpaper and chunks of plaster from the ceiling. Both rooms were empty, except for a bare, rusted bed frame in one. He had taken everything, or he'd had nothing to begin with. The place was a shell, stripped of any personality, any sign that a life had been lived here. It was just a decaying box. There was nothing here for me. No answers, no connection, just a profound and overwhelming sense of emptiness. I felt a pang of disappointment so sharp it was almost painful. I don't know what I was expecting. A photograph? A journal? Some small clue that would explain the last 13 years. But there was nothing. Just dust and decay. I had fulfilled my obligation. I had seen the property. Now I could leave, call Sarah, and sign the papers. I could take my $20,000 and start my life. I was about to turn and walk out the back door, to leave this place to its ghosts and its slow surrender to the woods. But something made me pause in the living room. It was the armchair. It was the only piece of real furniture left, the only thing that suggested someone had once sat here, perhaps staring into the fire, thinking. It was pulled away from the wall at an odd angle. On a whim, I walked over to it. The floorboards in this room were wide, old planks of dark wood. Behind the chair, almost completely hidden by it, one of the boards looked different. It was a slightly lighter shade, and the gap around it was wider, cleaner, as if it had been cut. My heart started to beat a little faster. I knelt down, my knees cracking. There was a small notch in the side of the board. I hooked my fingers into it and pulled. It was stiff, but it lifted. It wasn't a floorboard, it was a lid. Beneath it was a small, dark cavity, a secret space hidden in the floor. And inside that space, there was a metal box. It was an old Army surplus ammunition box, painted dark green, with a heavy latch on the front. It wasn't locked. My hands were trembling as I lifted it out. It was heavy, solid. I set it on the dusty floor, my breath catching in my throat. What was this? Money? Valuables he'd hidden? I fumbled with the latch, my fingers clumsy. It sprang open with a loud click. I lifted the lid. There was no money, no gold, no jewels. The box was filled with paper, stacks of envelopes, bundled together with twine. And on top of the bundles, there was a single, thicker envelope with my name, Leo, written on it in that same spidery script from the map. I sat there on the floor of the decaying house, the dusty air thick around me, and I held the envelope in my hands. This was it. This was the thing I had been looking for without even knowing it. An answer. A message from the ghost. My hands were shaking so much I could barely tear it open. Inside were several pages, filled with that same dense, slanting handwriting. I took a deep, shuddering breath and began to read. "My dear Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means you have found your way back here. I am sorry. Those are the first words I need to say to you. I am sorry for leaving. I know you must have spent your life hating me for it. You have every right. I want you to know it was the hardest thing I have ever done, harder than dying. I want you to know I thought of you every single day." The words blurred through a sudden film of tears. I wiped my eyes with the back of my dusty hand and kept reading. "I didn't abandon you, son. I protected you. This land, this orchard, it's not just land. It's a promise, and it's a cage. When your grandmother and I bought this place, it was our dream. We poured everything we had into it. But we were young and naive. We borrowed money from the wrong people to get started. Not a bank, a man in town, a man with a long reach and a hard heart. He seemed like a savior at first, but his help came with strings you can't see until they're wrapped around your throat. The debt grew, no matter how much we paid. It was a trap. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about bank loans and back taxes. This was something else entirely. After your grandmother passed, it was just you and me. I tried to keep up. I worked the orchard, I took side jobs, but the debt was a monster that just kept eating. The man, he started making threats. Not against me, against you. You were just a little boy, Leo, so full of light. He said if I couldn't pay, he would take his payment in other ways. He said a boy like you could be useful. That was the day I knew I had to get you away from here, away from me. The state, for all its faults, was a fortress I couldn't provide. They could keep you safe in a way I no longer could. Putting you into the system felt like cutting off my own arm. But I would have cut off both my arms and both my legs to keep you safe. So I disappeared from your life. I became a ghost so you could have a future. I had to stop reading. The letter trembled in my hands. The entire foundation of my life, the single solid fact of my abandonment, had just crumbled into dust. He hadn't left me. He had saved me. I was crying now, silent, hot tears, tracking clean paths through the grime on my face. Crying for the 6-year-old boy who thought his grandfather didn't love him. Crying for the old man who had to live out his life alone in this decaying house, carrying that terrible secret. I looked around the empty room, at the peeling wallpaper and the broken windows. This wasn't a monument to failure. It was a battleground. And he had lost the war, but he had made sure I survived it. I picked up the letter again, my vision blurry. The debt is still tied to this land. The man is gone now, but his organization remains, and they hold the paper. They are the ones behind stature development. It's a front, a way for them to acquire the land legally, to wash their money. They think the debt is their leverage. They don't know what's really buried here. I couldn't sell, Leo, not just out of stubbornness. Selling to them would be letting them win. It would mean everything I sacrificed was for nothing. But I am leaving the choice to you. In this box, you will find everything. All my records, every threat, every payment. It's not enough for a court of law, maybe, but it's the truth. There's another thing, too. Something I saved for you. There is a loose stone in the back of the fireplace, in the living room. The third one up from the left. Your inheritance isn't this broken-down house or the dead trees. It's a choice. You can take their money. $20,000 is a lot. You could build a good life for yourself, far away from here. No one would blame you. I wouldn't blame you. Or you can stay. You can fight. It will be hard. They will not make it easy. But this place, this land, it can be brought back to life. The soil is good. The roots are deep, just like you. The letter ended with 3 simple words. You are not alone. I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, the letter in my lap, the world remade. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, aching grief and a strange, fierce, new feeling. Purpose. I was no longer a ghost, untethered and drifting. I was standing on my own ground, my own history. I got up, my legs stiff, and walked to the fireplace. The stones were cold and covered in soot. I counted them. Third one up, from the left. It looked just like the others, but when I pushed on it, it wiggled slightly. I worked my fingers into the cracks around it, pulling and twisting. It was heavy, but it came loose, scraping against the other stones. I pulled it out and set it on the floor. Behind it, there was another dark cavity, and inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a second metal box, smaller than the first. It was a simple cash box. I lifted it out. This one was locked, with a small, simple keyhole. I looked at the ring of keys in my hand. The third key, the small, unassuming one. I slid it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I took a breath and opened it. My heart stopped. It was full of cash, stacks of old bills, 50s and 100s, held together with rubber bands that had grown brittle with age. It wasn't a fortune, not by a long shot, but it was a lot. I started counting, my hands shaking. 10,000, 20, 30. It was just over $40,000. $40,000 in cash. Tucked in the lid of the box was another, smaller note. "This is everything I saved," it read. "Every dollar I could hide from them. It's not enough to pay them off, but it might be enough to fix the roof. It might be enough to buy you time. It's seed money, for you or for the orchard. The choice is still yours, Leo. Freedom or a fight. Your grandmother always said, you don't find a home, you make one. Make your home, son, whatever you decide." $40,000. Combined with the developer's offer, I could walk away from this place with $60,000. I could go anywhere, do anything. A real apartment, a car, maybe even go to college. A clean slate, a new life, completely unburdened by this place and its dark history. It was the sensible choice, the safe choice. And yet, I looked at the letter in my other hand. I thought of my grandfather, alone in this house for all those years, fighting a silent, losing battle, saving every spare dollar, not for himself, but for me, for my choice. Selling the land would mean his sacrifice was for a payout. It would mean letting the people who destroyed his life win. It would mean running, just like he couldn't. And what about me? I had been running my whole life. Running from a past I didn't understand, from a feeling of being unwanted. But I wasn't unwanted. I was protected. I wasn't abandoned. I was loved. This place, this broken-down farm, this dying orchard, it wasn't a curse. It was a legacy. It was the only tangible piece of that love I had left. The soil is good. The roots are deep, just like you. He had seen something in me I had never seen in myself. Resilience, strength, the ability to grow in hard soil. Right now, if you're watching this, you might be at a crossroads of your own. Maybe you've just been handed a situation that looks impossible, a choice where the easy path is calling your name. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to choose between the easy money and the hard fight. Because what I learned in that dusty room is that some things are worth more than a clean break. Your story matters. This community is for people who get that. So share a piece of it if you feel comfortable. I stood up and walked to the back door, looking out at the tangled mess of the orchard. The sun was setting, casting long, golden rays of light through the twisted branches. It didn't look like a ruin anymore. It looked like a challenge. It looked like a promise. It looked like work, a lot of hard work. But for the first time in my life, the thought of hard work didn't scare me. It felt grounding. It felt like a purpose. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The battery was low, but it had enough juice. I found Sarah Davies' number in my call history and pressed the button. She answered on the second ring. "Sarah? It's Leo Vance." My voice didn't shake. It was clear and steady. "Leo, have you seen the property? I trust you've come to a sensible decision." "I have," I said, my eyes fixed on the gnarled trunk of the nearest apple tree. "I've made my decision." "Good," she said, a note of relief in her voice. "I'll draw up the acceptance papers for the offer from Stature Development. You can come by and sign them tomorrow." "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it filled the entire house. It echoed in the empty rooms. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry?" she said, confused. "Did you say no?" "I said no," I repeated, a smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like a decade. "I'm not selling. The offer is rejected. Tell them the property is not for sale." I could almost hear her frown through the phone. "Leo, I must advise you, this is a mistake. The debt—" "I know about the debt," I cut in, "and I'm going to handle it. This is my home now. I'm staying." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. The professional coolness was gone, replaced by something else, something like respect. "All right, Leo," she said softly. "All right. Call me if you need anything, and I mean anything." "I will," I said. "Thank you, Sarah." I hung up the phone. I had just turned down $20,000. I had just taken on a mountain of debt and a broken-down farm. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. I felt lighter than I had in my entire life. I felt free. The first night was cold. I didn't dare risk a fire in the crumbling fireplace, so I pulled the old, dusty armchair into the corner of the living room that seemed most protected from the drafts whistling through the broken windows. I ate a can of beans from my backpack, cold, and washed it down with water from my bottle. I didn't have a sleeping bag, so I huddled in my hoodie, using my backpack as a pillow. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the old house, every rustle in the woods outside, sounded like a threat. I thought about the men my grandfather wrote about. Were they still around? Would they be angry that the sale had fallen through? The $40,000 in the metal box felt less like a safety net and more like a target on my back. But as the moon rose, casting a pale, silvery light through the grimy windows, a strange sense of peace settled over me. This house, with all its groans and sighs, felt more like a home than any shelter or foster placement ever had. It was mine. The fear was mine. The cold was mine. And the future, whatever it held, was mine to build or to break. The next morning, I woke up stiff and sore, but with a clear head. The task ahead was monumental, overwhelming. I didn't even know where to begin. The house needed a new roof, new windows, new everything. The orchard needed to be cleared, pruned, saved. The debt needed to be confronted. I was just one person. A 19-year-old kid with no skills, no experience, and a dwindling supply of cash. I started with what I could control. I took a broom I found in a back closet, the bristles worn down to nubs, and I started sweeping. I swept the kitchen floor, raising a choking cloud of dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. I swept away the cobwebs, the dead leaves that had blown in, the plaster dust. It was a small, almost meaningless act in the face of such massive decay. But it was something. It was a start. As I worked, I made a list in my head. First, security. I needed to board up the broken windows and fix the back door so it locked properly. Second, shelter. I needed to patch the worst part of the roof, at least over one of the upstairs bedrooms, to stop the rain from getting in. Third, information. I needed to go through the other papers in the ammo box to understand the full scope of what my grandfather had been dealing with. That afternoon, I walked the 3 miles back into Havenwood. The old men on the bench watched me again, but this time their stares seemed less suspicious and more curious. I went to the hardware store. It was a wonderland of tools and supplies, smelling of sawdust and oil. An older man with a kind, wrinkled face and calloused hands asked if he could help me. "I need some plywood, a hammer, nails, and a good, sturdy lock," I said. He nodded, sizing me up. "You the boy staying out at the old Vance place?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. News traveled fast in a small town. "Yeah," I said, bracing myself for a warning or a joke at my expense. "That's me. I'm Leo." He just grunted. "Place has been falling apart for years. Arthur, he got quiet towards the end, kept to himself." He pulled a measuring tape from his belt. "Let's get you what you need." He helped me pick out everything, even showing me how to install the deadbolt. When I went to pay, the total was less than I expected. "Gave you the local discount," he said with a wink. "Anyone crazy enough to try and fix that place deserves a break. Name's George. If you need to borrow a tool you can't afford, you come see me." It was a small gesture, but it felt huge. A crack of light in the wall of isolation I had built around myself. I wasn't completely alone. The next few weeks were a blur of hard, physical labor. I boarded up the windows, installed the new lock, and with the help of a borrowed ladder from George and a dozen YouTube tutorials, I managed to patch the leak in the roof over one of the bedrooms. It wasn't pretty, but it was dry. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing away years of grime. I found an old pump in the backyard that, after a lot of coaxing, drew up clear, cold water from a well. I could wash. I could drink. I was living. It was the hardest work I had ever done, and I loved every minute of it. Every sore muscle, every splinter, was a testament to the fact that I was building something. I was making a home. At night, exhausted, I would sit at the old kitchen table and go through the papers my grandfather had left. It was a meticulous, heartbreaking record of his struggle. There were ledgers detailing his payments to the loan shark, with dates and amounts. There were copies of threatening letters. There were his own notes, documenting conversations, license plate numbers, names. He had been building a case, piece by piece, hoping to one day expose them. He just ran out of time. Reading his words, I felt a deep connection to him, a sense of shared purpose across the years. This wasn't just my fight now, it was ours. One afternoon, a dusty pickup truck rumbled up my overgrown driveway. A man I recognized from the bench in town got out. He was tall and wiry, with a deeply tanned face and piercing blue eyes. He walked right up to me, where I was struggling to cut down a dead tree with a handsaw. "You're Arthur's grandson," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said cautiously. "Heard you turned down the developers," he said, chewing on a piece of grass. "Heard you were staying. That's the plan." He looked me over, then looked at the pathetic progress I was making on the tree. Arthur was a good man, he said. Stubborn as a mule, but a good man. He wouldn't have wanted to see this place die. He spat the piece of grass onto the ground. That saw's no good for this kind of work. I've got a chainsaw in my truck. Let me give you a hand. His name was Bill. He had known my grandfather for 30 years. He told me stories as we worked, stories about the orchard in its prime, about my grandmother, about how my grandfather had changed after she died, and how he'd closed himself off after I was gone. We all knew he was in some kind of trouble, Bill said, his voice low as he shut off the chainsaw. But he wouldn't let anyone in. Too proud. That day, Bill helped me clear 3 dead trees. The next day, he came back with his son, and they helped me for the whole weekend. They didn't ask for anything in return. When I tried to offer them money from the box, Bill just shook his head. "Neighbors help neighbors," he said. "It's how it works out here. Your grandfather would have done the same for me." Slowly, tentatively, I was becoming part of a community. George at the hardware store, Bill and his son, the woman at the diner who always gave me an extra biscuit with my coffee. They were watching me, I knew, testing me, but they were also helping me. They saw a kid trying to do an impossible thing, and instead of laughing, they offered a hand. The loneliness that had been my constant companion for 13 years began to recede, like a fog burning off in the morning sun. My life fell into a new rhythm. Mornings were for the orchard, clearing brush, pruning the living trees, learning from books I got at the town library. Afternoons were for the house, repairing, painting, making it livable, one small project at a time. Evenings were for my grandfather's records, organizing them, trying to find a path forward. I contacted Sarah Davies and told her what I had found. She was cautious, but intrigued. She agreed to look over the documents, to see if there was enough to build a case, to challenge the legitimacy of the debt that still hung over the property like a storm cloud. One crisp autumn evening, I was sitting on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was cool and smelled of wood smoke from a distant chimney. The house was no longer a skeleton. It was starting to breathe again. The orchard was no longer a graveyard. It was a sleeping giant, waiting for spring. I had a long, long way to go. The fight with the developers was far from over. The house was still half ruined. I was still broke. But as I sat there, a feeling of deep, profound peace washed over me. My grandmother was right. You don't find a home. You make one. You build it, board by board, nail by nail. You defend it. You pour your sweat and your tears and your love into it, and it becomes a part of you. This place, Blackwood Orchard, was more than just land and a house. It was my history, my future, my connection to the family I thought I'd lost. It was the final gift from a grandfather who had loved me enough to let me go, and trusted me enough to find my way back. He left me a choice, freedom or a fight, and I had chosen the fight. I had chosen to put down roots, and for the first time in my life, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was home. What I've learned through all of this is that the most valuable inheritances aren't the ones that come easy. Sometimes the greatest gifts are buried under ruin and debt, and they look a lot like hard work. They're the second chances that ask you to be stronger than you've ever been. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own piece of ground, I hope you'll subscribe and stick around. We're building a community here for people who understand that the best stories are about more than just what we're given. They're about what we choose to build. Share your story in the comments below. I promise you, I read them all. Because every story of finding a home, of making a stand, deserves to be heard. You are not alone.